Well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, Wisdom of Crowds webinar, brought to you by Yellowfin and presented predominantly by Howard Dresner. We are very excited this year to present these results. I think the study that Howard does gives terrific insight into where the business intelligence industry is going and how ultimately individual vendors compare on a range of rankings within that. So for today's study, I'm Glen Rabie, I'm the CEO of Yellowfin, but I won't be doing that much talking, so you've been saved something there. Who really is presenting today and who's going to provide all the insight is Howard. Howard Dresner is the Chief Research Officer at Dresner Advisory Services, an independent advisory firm and well-known authority and author in the areas of business intelligence and performance management. Howard has had 30 years of IT experience with 22 years in the BI market. Previously, he spent 13 years at Gartner, where he was a research fellow and lead analyst for BI. And he also served as the Chief Strategy Officer at Hyperion Solutions prior to joining Dresner Advisory Services. So suffice to say, Howard is eminently qualified to talk about the BI market. So we're delighted today to have him here and have him presenting to you. So on that note, I'd like to hand over to Howard. In terms of the presentation, Howard will do a presentation for about the next 30-35 minutes, and we will then do a small piece on Yellowfin, followed by open questions and answers. So I look forward to the next hour. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Glenn, for that introduction. Much appreciated, and welcome to everybody that's on today's webinar. This edition of the Wisdom of Crowds Business Intelligence Market Study is actually the third annual version of it. And we're actually very proud because we continue not only to grow the mind share in the marketplace, but we also continue to expand the subject matter of the survey. And today I'm actually going to cover 4 different areas from this year's study. And those of you that are on the webinar that participated in the study, we thank you. We try to make it as inclusive a process as possible. And if you have not participated in one of our studies, I would encourage you to go to our website, which is howarddresner.com, and just add yourself to our interest list, and we will send you out the newsletter so that you can participate in the future as well. So there are 4 areas that I'm going to cover today. I'll talk a bit about adoption of business intelligence, success with business intelligence, the user priorities associated with business intelligence, and then the last topic will be industry performance. But to get things underway, let me just share some of the demographics. As I said, we try to be as inclusive as possible, so you can see that we have a pretty good geographic mix, even though it tends to favor North America. That includes 34 U.S. states and 4 Canadian provinces, as well as the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. We had 19 countries in the EMEA region, 9 in Asia Pacific, and a smaller sample in Latin America. A good distribution of sizes of organizations, which is really important because we do find some pretty strong contrasts between size of organization. And same thing is true between IT and line of business. The sample was almost exactly evenly split, 50-50, and then of course a number of key verticals. So let's start off talking about adoption trends. And this is one that we've tracked for a number of years now. And what this tells us, and what you see here, are those folks within organizations that are in fact adopting or are aligned with the business intelligence solutions in their organization. That blue area on the bottom represents the IT function. And those areas above, in the red and the green and the purple shaded areas, represent various business functions that are adopting business intelligence themselves. And you can see in that 6 to 10 year ago range, that was the height of IT adoption of business intelligence. And over time, you can see that that has leveled off, and that increasingly we see more line of business adoption or business intelligence driven by line of business, much more so than ever before. You can see that globally, it's now at 55%. So it's much more of a line of business and user-driven marketplace out there today than ever before. Now we take a look at the numbers of users by deployment, and this represents 3 years or includes 3 years worth of data. And you see the 3 lines for each year in our bar chart here with an average behind it in that area chart treatment. And what we see is sort of a new center of gravity for the numbers of users for a business intelligence implementation, somewhere hovering in that 21 to 100 or 200 user group size. What has happened, as you can see, in the past we've had very strong growth of the smaller deployments, and we still have a good number of those. But as those have grown up, they've shifted towards the center there. Very large deployments remain relatively static at 12% of our sample, but it's that middle that seems to be growing up, and a lot of that also has to do with mid-sized organizations getting involved, which you'll see on a subsequent chart. So this presents numbers of users in a slightly different light. Here we take a look at the numbers of users by the size of the organization. And the reason this is significant is because penetration of business intelligence within organizations still remains relatively modest. And back in 1993, I used the term information democracy to describe a time when every user in an organization, and perhaps beyond, would have access to timely and relevant information to carry out the tasks associated with their role. In other words, enforcing or enhancing the decision-making process. And we are still very far away from that notion of everyone having access to business intelligence. If you look way to the right, even in some of the largest of organizations, some of them have less than 100 users, and these are organizations that are more than 10,000 employees in size. It's probably most striking in sort of the mid-size space, where a significantly large number of organizations have woefully few business intelligence users. So the bad news is penetration is far lower than we'd like. The good news is there's tremendous opportunity to improve within a number of organizations by delivering business intelligence to those users. We also asked about the numbers of tools within organizations, and what you see here on this chart really understates the problem. Every organization, well, maybe not the problem, but the issue, I should say. Most organizations have more than one tool. As you can see, anything that's not shaded blue indicates more than one business intelligence tool, and that's okay if it's deliberate. And I would suggest that more tools, once again, if it's part of an overall strategy, is actually healthy, because different tools are more or less applicable to different kinds of users. As you would imagine, as you move to the right to large organizations, you have more and more tools. In some cases, they simply don't know. And once again, with a user-driven market, that isn't surprising. When we take a look at deployment from a size of organization perspective, we can see once again that mid-size market trend is starting to play out. And we've been talking about the mid-size market, or small and mid-size, the SMEs, for years and years. I mean, it's not really one market, but it is one way of looking at the marketplace. And you can see that within the last year, we've seen a significant amount of growth in those mid-sized organizations, 1,001 to perhaps that 5,000 range, have been growing. Most notably, the 1,001 to 2,000 employee size of organizations. And we've seen a trailing off of some of the very small ones and some of the very large ones. And to us, this is actually a positive sign, because we'd like to see all organizations, whether they be very large or very small or in between, benefit from business intelligence. So a lot of that growth over the last year seems to have come from more mid-sized organizations. And then geographically, this is the first time we've actually seen fewer North American implementations. We actually saw some pretty significant growth in EMEA, so European, Middle East, and Africa, and also an uptick of growth in the Asia-Pacific region, but less growth or a decline, at least within our sample, within North America. So once again, more broad-based deployments of business intelligence geographically, as well as size of organization. Next thing I'd like to talk about is success with business intelligence. Now, you would have thought that over the last 3 years, we would have always asked whether or not organizations believe themselves or perceive themselves to be successful with business intelligence. But in fact, we didn't. It didn't occur to us until this year's survey. So we added a question around whether or not organizations believe they were successful with business intelligence. And the good news is that 89% say they have been completely or somewhat successful with business intelligence. That's great, and of course, even though we don't have the data, I can say with a good degree of certainty that if I'd asked that question 5 years ago, the outcome wouldn't have been quite as positive as that 89% number. Having said that, 11% still don't perceive themselves to have been extremely successful with business intelligence at all. Now, if we cross-tab this or drill down a little bit and look by size of organization, we can see that the smaller the organization, the more likely they perceive themselves to be successful with business intelligence. I don't think that's really a surprise, but it's interesting to see it in actual empirical data. It's not a surprise because large organizations are, of course, far more complex and therefore driving broad-based and more strategic success with business intelligence is quite a bit more difficult. So we actually asked those organizations to give us some feedback, some actual comments as to why they had been successful or why they had not been successful with their business intelligence initiative. And it seems to boil down to, so we actually sifted through all of this data and found some comments that were particularly indicative of these different areas, but it seemed to boil down to these 6 different categories that either contributed to their success or detracted from their success, starting at the top, no surprise, management, maturity, and support. So, you know, if you look at your own organization, I'm sure many of you can relate to this. Senior management, when they believe in the power of business intelligence and where they take ownership of it, they tend to be much more successful because life tends to be a push-down stack, as I like to say, where if senior management are committed to something, it does tend to filter through the rest of the organization. Conversely, if you don't have that level of understanding and investment, if senior management don't use business intelligence themselves, you're less likely to have that degree of support. Expertise and resources, obviously you have to have people that know how to do this, that are well organized, that are experienced as a team to deliver business intelligence, whether this is in the form of a competency center or some other organizational structure. It seems to be important where you have qualified, experienced people that are doing this. It could be an external organization as well. As a point of failure, a lack of resources tends to be a problem. If you look at focus, focus is really important too. Taking on specific projects with high impact and allowing success to breed more success, spread by word of mouth, seems to be a great approach as opposed to trying to, as we say, boil the ocean all at once. Having the right organizational structure is also important. That goes hand in glove with expertise and resources. One of the downsides, one of the failure points is ongoing changes in top management. That seems to be a problem. So even if you have a committed management structure, if there's constant reorganization, you oftentimes have to start all over again. Perceiving business intelligence as something that's really strategic. This is something that's crucial to our success, and therefore we invest in it at a strategic level as opposed to focusing on total cost of ownership or return on investment. I mean, certainly those are valuable measures, but if that's really what's driving your investment, chances are you don't perceive it as really strategic. And then, of course, technology does play a role here. We do have to have good technology, but I will say that the best of technology without those other pieces in place probably won't help you. Conversely, if you have all those other pieces in place, the worst technology can add value. Of course, if you have all of those things aligned, likely great things will happen. So now let's talk about priorities as it relates to business intelligence. And last year we asked about 9 different areas or related technology areas for business intelligence. This year we expanded it to 16 And you can see it on our chart here, going from dashboards and self-service all the way down to things like social media analysis and open source and a bunch of things in between. And what's notable, and we will drill down on this in just a moment, what's notable is that things like dashboards and end-user self-service and data warehousing, traditional business intelligence, if you will, remain at the top of the list for investment, whereas other things like complex event processing, social media analysis, and open source are at the bottom. But this doesn't tell the entire picture. There are areas that are sort of rising, if you will. Things like collaborative capabilities, mobile, of course, quite important, has been a rising star, as well as cloud computing and visualization. So there are some rising stars in here, but just to look at this chart, it would suggest that not much is changing. And of course, we know that's not true. In fact, quite a bit is changing. So let's take a look at some of these different initiative areas, like mobile device support. We've actually published 3 studies on mobile business intelligence, and we'll be publishing our 4th mobile BI study at the end of this year. And we see that there is, from a vertical perspective, very strong investment from high tech, not a surprise, but also retail and wholesale. In fact, some of the more interesting use cases come out of retail and wholesale. And in some ways, I would argue that mobile and mobile business intelligence is literally transforming those industries. Next would be advanced visualization, and I know there's constant debate around advanced visualization and what is advanced visualization, and I don't claim to be an expert on advanced viz, but I will say it's the advanced use of size and color and shape and texture and movement to clearly convey information, especially when you have extremely large volumes of information, so users can derive real meaning. What we see here is that there is relatively broad interest in advanced visualization, but most notably, off to the right, business most keenly interested in using advanced visual techniques, and that makes a great deal of sense. Of course, we as humans tend to be very visual folks, and therefore your business users would be much more likely to get value out of a good visual representation of complex data than perhaps a report. Collaborative business intelligence, we just published a collaborative BI report this month. And what we find that, in general, the most support comes out of what we call our quintessential end users, being our sales and marketing folks. And this is an area that we see emerging in the marketplace, where users can fully leverage their business intelligence capabilities by engaging in conversations with other folks in the organization to drive towards consensus or leverage perhaps scarce resources within that organization. And to put a finer point on things, we actually crossed this with our success metrics. And what we found is those organizations which perceive themselves to be most successful with business intelligence also viewed collaborative business intelligence, that ability to annotate and share business intelligence insights with others, as being extremely important. So collaborative is quite important too. And then, of course, cloud. Well, cloud is going to be a longer road for sure, more of an evolutionary path in our estimation. But we see that business functions tend to be much more receptive to cloud-based business intelligence than arguably finance or IT. Finance and IT tend to be fairly concerned about privacy and security and availability and reliability. Also, moving large amounts of data up into the cloud is an area of concern as well. So therefore, we see greater resonance with line of business users who see it as a greater immediacy to getting the information that they need. And then if we look at it by size of organization, and this really isn't a surprise with one minor exception, the smaller organizations, or the smallest of sized organizations, tend to be much more well-aligned with the notion of cloud-based business intelligence for obvious reasons. We're a small organization, and we do a great deal in the cloud because it tends to be more cost-effective to do so, and there tend to be a fair number of options out there to choose from to get up and running quickly. But if you look over to the right, so in the middle you have less interest in the notion of cloud-based business intelligence, and way over to the right, we see it pick up again in the largest of organizations, most notably at a departmental level. So there is that sort of buying behavior within the largest of organizations departmentally, and then, of course, in the smallest organizations, really at an enterprise level, making that level of commitment to cloud-based. And then one more way of taking a look at this before we start going into the industry performance, we actually crossed all of those 16 different technology or initiative dimensions by our three major roles: IT, sales and marketing, and finance. So you see the blue area are the IT scores, and these are weighted mean averages. So the further out it is in our spider chart, the more important it is to that particular constituency. The red shaded area are our line of business folks, our sales and marketing folks, and the green shaded area are finance. And what you see emerging here, and I don't want to overstate this, but what appears to be emerging here in my estimation is sort of a new business intelligence versus a classic business intelligence. And this is not to make a value judgment as to whether one is better than the other, but simply to show you which particular areas are aligning or resonating with which constituencies. So you see that red area, or the red line, those are our line of business folks, and they care a great deal about social and software as a service and cloud computing, big data, collaborative, mobile, and advanced visualization. And then if you look at IT, very interested in data warehousing, somewhat less interested in some of those other areas like mobile, and certainly less interested in cloud and social media analysis. And finance also tends to be extremely conservative, even more so at some points, such as mobile device support. So you see sort of this new era or new world, or as I would call the renaissance of business intelligence on the right, and you sort of have more classic, more traditional business intelligence on the left. In a perfect world, we would get everybody aligned, and we would try to achieve all of those things in unison. The reality is in the market, things are sorting out a little bit differently in terms of which solutions are being adopted. So now let's talk a little bit about industry performance. And we actually track 33 different measures of industry and vendor performance for that point as well. And we actually categorize vendors into 4 different segments or subcategories, if you will. We have the titans, the largest of vendors, what we call the established pure plays, also much older and larger pure play organizations. We have what we call the high growth segment, and then we have the emerging segment. So 4 different segments, and we track, like I said, 33 different measures for those segments as well as for individual vendors. And so at an industry level, these are the sales measures that we take a look at. So what does the acquisition experience look like for organizations? And what you can see is, in general, at an industry level, the respondents gave relatively high marks for things like product knowledge and professionalism and responsiveness. And down at the bottom, areas that need improvement. And I should say that these are good scores. But if there is an area that needs improvement, those users tell us that it would be terms and conditions, understanding business needs, and follow-up after the sale. Now, this is a really important one. This is the product set of dimensions or measures. And you can see at an industry level, so all of the products, they believe that the job is generally getting done. So the robustness and sophistication of the technology gets pretty good scores. Reliability, scalability, and usability, also good scores. The areas, and this has been consistent for 3 years now, the areas that those users believe we need improvement would be in the areas of integration with third-party technology. And then this one was much more prominent this year than in previous years: online training, forums, and documentation, followed by customization and extensibility. So in general, good scores, but clearly there are areas where at an industry level, these respondents believe we could achieve some improvement. Technical support, also really good scores at an industry level, excellent professionalism and product knowledge, pretty good responsiveness. The areas, once again, consistent with the previous 2 years that we need to improve are time to resolve problems and continuity of personnel, because anyone that's ever spent time in tech support know that it's a pretty difficult job. Consulting services from the vendor, also generally good scores. good product knowledge, good professionalism. The areas that they believe, the respondents believe need improvement is specifically in the area of value and continuity. Once again, coming out of the services industry many, many years ago, very often we would bring on new consultants and they would start on their first day within the client site. And if they were really good, very often the client hired them away. So continuity was a real problem for them. And then value for the price paid. And once again, generally very good scores at an industry level, but the value is, dropped a little bit at an industry level for this year. And I believe that's probably largely because of the economic downturn or the recession that we find ourselves within. But on balance, most organizations, almost 70%, believe that the value is either great or very good value. And then this year we added one more measure that we did not have in previous years, and this is the integrity measure, because we, most of us, I believe, but certainly here at Dresner Advisory Services, we believe that personal and professional integrity is crucial. So you can see that at least at an industry level, the respondents believe that their vendor's integrity is either excellent or good at the 75% level, which is good, and then average less than that. And only a very small percentage really felt that their vendor did not have good integrity. So now I just want to transition into some individual scores. I'm going to share with you the emerging segment scores, which is the segment that Yellowfin was ranked in. And you can see at an aggregate level, those 7 different areas that we measure: the sales and acquisition, the value for the price paid, the product dimensions, technical support, consulting, the recommended score, which is one that we also include, and integrity, and then the overall score on the far end on a 5-point scale, so the overall average. And you can see that Yellowfin did especially well. They are our top-ranked vendor in the emerging segment, and actually overall as well. And we also use a spider chart for all of our vendors. So we ranked 17 vendors this year. And here you see that we have Yellowfin score. And just to give you a moment to digest this chart, it's rather complex. We actually have the 33 measures mapped out here. Starting at 12 o'clock, you have the sales scores going from 12 o'clock to just about 2 o'clock. Then we have the value. And then we start all of the product ones. The product measures go from the 3 o'clock position all the way around to about 7 o'clock. And then we have technical support. And then starting at about the 9 o'clock position to about 11 o'clock, we have consulting, integrity, and then the recommended score. And then the lines, so the blue line represents, in this case, Yellowfin's score. The red line is the overall sample. And the green line is the peer average, so the other emerging vendors. And obviously further out, as we mentioned before, further out is a better score. So in this case, clearly Yellowfin did especially well across all of those measures. So just some quick conclusions, and then I'll turn things back over to our host for today. Just to recap the things we talked about, increasingly this market is very much business and user driven, much more so than ever before, and we think that's going to be a continuing trend as users believe in and actually experience the value associated with business intelligence. We saw strong growth this year in the mid-market and in particular geographically in EMEA, as well as Asia Pacific. Larger deployments, certainly, which is good, but yet penetration remains relatively low, so some great opportunities out there for organizations to get business intelligence into the hands of more users, more eyes on the data, and inevitably getting folks more aligned with the strategy as a result. We talked about success with business intelligence, that it takes a lot more than just great technology, but certainly great technology with all of those other things in place could in fact move things forward or move the needle, as we like to say, rather substantially. And then we talked about new business intelligence, if you will, versus classic business intelligence. Increasingly, business users are driving mobility and collaboration, visualization, cloud and social, big data, and some others, which is actually quite exciting because we are seeing a great deal of innovation, but it does create some discontinuity. And then finally, certainly the respondents to our study ranked the industry relatively well, pretty good performance overall, but there's always room for improvement in some of the key areas that we talked about. And next year we'll have 4 years worth of data. We'll hope to see some important improvements along the way. So on that note, I'd like to turn things over to Glen.
Thank you, Howard. That was, yes, certainly, there's a lot of insight in it. There's absolutely a lot of information as well. Let me just bring myself back into being a presenter. So yeah, I think overall, if we're looking at the results from our perspective, I think what we've learnt in looking at these over the last few years and being participants in this study is obviously understanding how the market is changing. I think Howard's touched on a number of points, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment from our perspective. One of the things that I'd like to point out as a vendor and looking at the market study is actually, from our perspective, being able to track our performance. One of the things that Howard doesn't include in the study is really, I suppose, how vendors change from year to year, and I think that's also quite a fascinating perspective. So what we've done is we took last year's study and looked at comparatively to this year, and just to see how we've changed. So there are a number of factors that, if we look at our business and the way in which our product is perceived and part of it, our product strategy, we felt we could certainly improve upon from previous years. And I think this year we've made a huge effort to do that. As you can see, the red line represents this year versus the blue line of last year. So from our perspective, we certainly take on board very much the feedback that we get through the study, the understanding of the study, feed that back into our business, feed that back into our product, and really focus on improving the offering that we bring to market. To give a sense of that, and to sort of to think about how and where Yellowfin fits within the market, and relate that back to the study, and certainly one of the big shifts that we've done over the last couple of years is really a much broader focus. So looking at BI as a far more significant sector in terms of consumption of BI information. So generally speaking, most vendors focus very much on the analyst community, the data analyst, whereas Yellowfin is far more now looking at that line of business, the sales people, HR people, etc., and looking at what their needs are in data consumption and how they share that information, etc. And from our perspective, not only is it a study, but what we really look at this is, to some degree, the consumerization of BI, or we refer to as well as the Googleization of BI. People are experiencing analytics in many applications, and they want to have that same experience back in the workplace. So they're looking at their BI vendor to provide the same ease of use, the same access to information, the same insight as they get using applications outside of the workplace. And so for us, this understanding is really driving a lot of what we're doing. And a key factor of that, and we touched on mobility, is really, we've got a huge focus, obviously, in the mobile space. It's a highly convenient component of BI, and Howard did touch on it. He does have another study coming out later this year, as he mentioned, a mobile BI study. And what we're seeing really is a very much a big push. I think the study and our own experience is really showing this massive growth of mobile BI, and really driven not because people have it as a single device, but because people are multi-device. People are using many devices. And this really, again, drives the perspective of how successful BI is in the organization. Can I access my BI from not just one platform, from multiple platforms? Is it the same content? Do I get the same experience? These things are really critically important to a successful BI deployment. And really, most interestingly, I think, again, to touch on the mobile piece and just adding flesh to that, is around the fact that the smartphone is still very much the preferred method of mobile access, which I thought was really quite a fascinating outcome out of that study. So from a Yellowfin perspective, we'll continue to invest heavily in our mobile component and really to drive innovation in that space. Secondly, we've got a lot of emphasis moving forward on collaboration. So in our next release in November, there will be certainly a lot of additional functionality in this area. We already have quite a bit of collaboration within Yellowfin. I think it's something we do very well. But the more that we look at it, the more we investigate it, the more we realize that there's so much more value to be added in the collaboration space. So for us, again, it'll be a strategic initiative for us to continue to work in that area. And really, why do we see it as being so important? Because we do believe it's really the next wave of business intelligence. So the ability fundamentally to share and to overlay human context onto your data to really add knowledge to what people are perceiving. And so, there is, from a perspective of examples, certainly a lot that we want to do in that space. Now, personally, I've actually got a number of questions that I'd like to ask Howard. We're going to throw it open to questions now. You will see a question and answer panel. Feel free to use that. We'll start to go through those questions now and respond to that. We'll certainly touch on those. I mean, for me, I think, personally, when looking at the study, I thought the understanding what makes a successful project is really important. And I'm intrigued to know from an SME perspective, Howard, why do you think that small organizations tended to have, SMEs tended to have a higher ranking than larger enterprise organizations? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. And I think it has to do with span of control is one of them. But also small organizations have to find whatever mechanisms they can to be successful in the marketplace because they don't have the mass that a large organization does. They don't have the resources at their disposal. So they have to find some means to achieve some competitive advantage. And many of them are locking onto things like business intelligence to do so. Because if you're a small organization and you don't find ways to level the playing field, then you never get to be a larger organization.
Yeah, that is true. So in terms of, there's one question here that's come through, why do you think Yellowfin is less recommended in 2012 than 2011? That's a good question, and so the scale is out of 5, and I think we went back to about something. So the vast majority of people, it's not that we're getting not recommended. It's not a 5 out of 5. It's still a 4 out of 5 plus average. I think some of the growth that we've had over the past year has meant to some degree we've got a much bigger consistency, much different base of audience. We have done some very, very large deployments as well over the last year. So potentially that feeds back into that the larger deployment, larger organisation versus smaller organisation type feedback. But again, it's a good question. It's certainly something that we focused on. It's something that over the next year we'll definitely focus on in terms of how we work to improve that and at least maintain that level and improve it. There was a question here. In the Dresner study, the Titan vendors scored poorly overall with Oracle and SAP ranking in the last 2 positions overall. Do you see BI solutions like Yellowfin taking over as the new leaders in BI over the next few years? Howard, your thoughts?
Well, I hate to make predictions.
I didn't ask that one. I didn't ask that one, Howard.
Well, I mean, that's why we segment the market into those 4 different categories, and we change the segmentation every year. For instance, last year we had an open source category, but we did not structure it that way this year, and we reintegrated the vendors with an open source history or lineage, if you will, into the other categories. So we have a segment called Titans, and the Titans include the very largest systems vendors that what they call the MISO vendors. Microsoft and IBM and SAP and Oracle are in that category, and the buyers for them oftentimes are different. Very often they're IT-driven more than anything else. And the reason we segment vendors into different categories is because they have similar demographics. But I will say that the emerging vendors have among the highest scores out there. Does that mean they're going to, take over? Not necessarily. That certainly is where a lot of the growth is coming from at the moment, and a lot of that growth tends to come from the line of business. So right now, I think most of the vendors seem to be doing relatively well. It's sort of a rising tide, if you will, lifting all boats. But I would say the emerging and then what we call the high growth segment seem to be getting the lion's share of some of that new business.
There is and I think this ties quite well into that question just then, Howard. Is the market moving towards an a la carte BI solution or consolidated BI suite? So I think a question around the stack, so solutions that have BI, data warehouse, ERP all combined and comes as one package, so a complete stack, enterprise stack versus best of breed.
Well, anecdotally speaking, I would say more towards a la carte. And that's because so much of the activity right now is being driven by the line of business, and the line of business are looking to solve a more near-term, more urgent problem than perhaps a more top-down solution might be striving to solve. Top-down, would some of the criteria would be integration with their ERP or their CRM system or whatever the case may be, whereas if I'm in sales or I'm in marketing, I'm looking to solve a business problem as immediately or as quickly as I can. So two very different buying centers, and if the users are buying and deploying more so than IT, it's going to be more a la carte, I think.
Yeah, I think, and I'd agree with you, Howard. That's something that, when back many moons ago when I was actually a BI consultant, one of the things that sort of struck me very early on, it's a message that I've always carried with me, is that there's this huge continuum in BI needs. There's, from production, pixel perfect statement reporting all the way through to very much high-end analytics. And the message at the time was that there's really no one BI vendor that does all of those exceedingly well that can cater entirely to an organization. So you do find, whether or not you look at BI vendors that have the stack versus the best of breed approach, fundamentally, the stack is basically just a conglomeration of tools versus best of breed is single point solutions. But the need that they fulfill is the fact that there are multiple BI needs within organizations. There is no single homogeneous need. And I think as the industry matures, we tend to see this being driven more and more. The fact that you have lines of business, as you said then, Howard, who are out there in the market looking to solve their particular problems in the way that suits them best. Would you agree to that?
I would agree, and what we find is several different models within organizations. In some cases, you see more of a parallel strategy where you have different buying centers for different tools. In some cases, we see more of a deliberate strategy, even an IT-driven strategy where IT may have a standard, which is one of the MISO vendors, but for certain classes of users and applications, they decide to bring in a different tool and a different vendor to complement the existing investment. So it needn't be parallel or fragmented in nature. It could be highly complementary and much more deliberate.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. And this is, again, I think this is about Yellowfin. I might show you this question. How do you compare Yellowfin with MicroStrategy for their cloud initiatives? To be honest, this is probably not the exact forum to really spend a lot of time talking about Yellowfin per se. From our perspective, we work with our channel partner to deliver cloud. We don't deliver cloud directly ourselves. Yellowfin is completely cloud enabled, but we don't see that as our core business strategy, certainly at this stage. But Howard, I mean, you did touch on the cloud as an emerging feature, not huge, but again, and I think we saw that really being driven out of the business again. I think, do you think that that's really driven by the sort of, again, coming back to that convenience factor, like similar to mobile, it is convenient, it's easy, I can switch it on, I can switch it off?
Well, yes, that's true. I think that, cloud, I mean, inevitably, I think we march towards cloud-based deployment, but it's going to be a slow and a difficult march. It's not something that's going to be revolutionary in my estimation. There are clearly applications out there that are real home runs, and there are certain business intelligence applications out there today that make sense to have them up in the cloud. But from the study which we're going to be publishing within the next month on cloud-based business intelligence, most organizations are more interested in private cloud than public cloud or a hybrid model, which means it's more of an architectural discussion at this point. And there are a lot of reasons for that. So even though ultimately I think we end up in the cloud, so to speak, it's going to take a great while before that becomes the dominant model. Now, to your question, are users driving some of this? Yes, certainly the line of business is much more agreeable to cloud-based deployment, and smaller organizations much more agreeable to it. But having said that, you have to not be religious about a particular deployment style or architecture. You have to understand what users are trying to achieve. Users want solutions, or business wants solutions, that are relatively easy to buy, easy to implement, easy to use, and can deliver value very, very quickly. And if the cloud can do that, so be it. If they could do it with, as I like to say, 2 cans and a string, they would do that as well.
Okay. No, that clearly makes sense. The other thing I thought, and there's a question to this, I think it was around the time when you were talking about new innovations in BI. The question said, it seems that finance is not in favour of innovation, short-term vision. I'll come back to that. But what I also thought was really fascinating in your piece was this correlation between collaborative BI and successful BI projects. Again, I'd like to sort of drill into that for your thoughts on that a little bit more as well.
Yes, and what we asked them is their inclination towards collaborative if they had been successful with BI. And I believe that the rationale for that is simply that if you've been very successful with business intelligence, you want to find ways to maximize and optimize that. And how better to do that than by sharing it more broadly or leveraging other resources that may be scarce within the organization to drive towards some sort of consensus. The other really exciting thing about collaboration is that we can start to document our decisioning process within an organization, which means we can, for the first time, perhaps start to document and establish best practice decision-making within an organization, which is something that has been difficult to do heretofore. So I think collaborative technology related to business intelligence, and I would agree with you, is one of the next big things for many reasons. And those organizations that have been successful with BI are the most likely early adopters.
Yeah, no, I think, again, I'd agree certainly with what you're saying there in terms of that. I think, and coming back to this, I mean, we've talked in industry for pervasive BI for a long time, do you think that finally, ultimately, vendors are, I suppose, stepping up to not just purely, and this comes to the collaborative piece again, but not really just purely to the needs of the business analysts, the sort of the core constituent that is predominantly there, but really this wider audience?
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, we're seeing it in the marketplace as we speak, simply because a lot of the new solution providers in the industry have focused on line of business. And I think it's been a great forcing function. It's always healthy to have innovative young companies in the marketplace to raise the bar, so to speak, for everybody else. Of course, initially you get a lot of established vendors claiming capabilities, and then over time they actually fill in the product suite with those capabilities. And that's where I think we are at the moment, sort of the latter stage, where all the vendors are starting to add the capabilities, sort of like what some call data discovery, but the visual exploration of data. So some vendors have that as sort of the centerpiece of their offering, and now everyone is sort of following suit with better visual exploration. So in fact, some analysts were considering actually making that a new category, which wouldn't have made sense because it's not terribly long-lasting. So the innovators in the marketplace are the ones that, as I said, raise the bar for everybody else, and I think that's been exciting because it's really driven the industry to a new level where by itself it might never have gotten otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that point exactly. I was in a summit recently, and we were sort of talking about the last 5 years, and there's been tremendous innovation in the space. But to sort of come back to this, the decision-making process, document decision-making process, best practice decision-making, this is a really murky area. Should BI bring collaboration to the org or vice versa? So I think that's a really good point. Where does collaboration belong? Do you think, Howard?
Well, also a very good question. We just published our collaborative study, our collaborative BI study, and what our respondents told us is that they really want the collaborative capabilities within the business intelligence environment for the most part. And there are a subset that do want the business intelligence tool to also work with a broader enterprise collaborative framework, but they are in the minority. So as a starting point, it sounds like organizations, at least from our purview, want those capabilities, especially things like annotation, co-creation, and sharing within the business intelligence tool itself. And then, of course, those that have a collaborative framework already in place do want the business intelligence tool to take advantage of those broader enterprise capabilities.
Yeah. And I mean, to sort of drill into this question a little bit more from our perspective, it's certainly something that we contemplated early on, saying, well, where does it belong? And I think when we looked at our custom set and what their expectations were, there was certainly some collaboration that people very much do expect to be within the BI tool, so the capacity to share quickly. The decision-making model, I think, is one of those sort of the grey areas. But then on the flip side, I don't think there's actually a lot of great product out there in that space either. It's very much an emerging space. There are no organisational standards. So I think it's sort of a first mover piece where people at the moment, certainly within the industry, are sort of jockeying around saying, okay, where do I place this? Does it make sense here? Speaking from our perspective, we have included decision-making within the application, much more in a discussion level, if you like. But there's far more to that. There's far more to collaboration than just purely documenting a decision per se, but really looking at the whole context and the way information is used. A follow-on from that is the movement towards collaboration and social, moving the BI industry away from traditional licensing models. Howard's your thought on that?
Well, I've never been a fan of traditional licensing models myself, but when you look at, if we want to talk about social for a moment, not as a licensing model per se, but as a way of communicating business intelligence, or also the other side of that, analyzing social interactions. The analyzing part of it is still relatively nascent, and there are products out there that do strive to do that largely through things like keywords and text-based analysis. And then there's the other side of it, which is much more of a collaborative thing, where we, especially with younger people, where they use social media extensively, using those same capabilities, whether internal to the organization or external where appropriate, to share and to be transparent with information, once again, using those sorts of collaborative techniques to drive consensus with an organization and to get more eyes on the data, so to speak, to increase the transparency within an organization. So tell me a little bit more what you mean in terms of licensing models, Glenn.
Yeah, this is a question from directly from one of the participants. So if I could probably answer to that, I think I would agree. I think so. From a Yellowfin perspective, what we've seen is a much larger movement towards what we call sort of the open enterprise deployment of BI. So people using BI tools to deliver reporting and dashboards, and all the way through to their customers and to their suppliers. As a result of that, obviously the traditional model of $10,000 per seat, all the way through to that constituent is not possible. So from the perspective of Yellowfin, we certainly do have what we consider an internal and external licensing model. That as you move outside of the organisation, if you have large deployments, then we certainly understand that the level of value derived for a customer using BI from an organisation is probably far less ultimately than if it was used entirely internally by an internal user. So as a result, we do have a differential licensing, differential pricing to that. So the long and short of that is, I think as we move towards collaboration, you're going to have a much, much larger user base. and as a result of that, vendors need to look at the price model to support rolling out to those large user bases as well. And a large one here, can we get a copy of the slides? Certainly, I think that's the easiest thing we can do. So this pack will be packaged up. There will be a video of it, and we'll certainly distribute the content from our perspective with that. If there are any other questions, we'll just get to the top of the hour, I've noticed. Once again, I'd really like to thank Howard for the work he does in this study. It certainly helps us. It gives terrific insight into the state of the market. The entire market study is available from the Yellowfin website. Again, we'll include that as part of the deliverables, so you'll get to all the detail that's in there, as well as the commentary from Howard. But once again, Howard, I'd like to thank you an awful lot for attending and presenting today. And we certainly really appreciate the time. And so there was a question again about, but which I responded to earlier, so we'll touch base on that later on. But once again, Howard, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Glenn.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.